Robert, what have we got on today's show?
Kate, we're going to be addressing Diana, the final chapter, from her separation through to her divorce, through to that dark, dark day that none of us will ever forget. Welcome to another episode of Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things. I'm Robert Hardman, Daily Mail columnist and royal biographer. I'm joined as ever by my colleague, Professor Kate Williams, also royal biographer, also royal historian. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Robert.
And today we are on the third episode of our deep dive into the life, times and remarkable legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. Kate, last time we got as far as the historic moment in 1992 when the Prime Minister stood up and announced their separation.
John Major announced the separation, but it was announced in the House of Commons that the constitutional situation would be the same. Diana would still be Queen, and of course she was still the mother of the future king. They simply were not getting divorced. It was separation. So Diana moves out of Highgrove and she occupies Kensington Palace, where she'd been since her marriage, full time. And this is the beginning of a new chapter for Diana. This is the moment by which she can really channel her philanthropy and put herself on the global stage as really a charity ambassador. And this is going to be the new Diana. She is, to a large degree, free.
I mean, I remember it well from my time then as a royal correspondent, and everyone was just very confused. How is this going to work? She's still HRH. She's a princess, but she's separated.
She's still Princess of Wales.
And she's going to be queen, but she's sort of not, part of the sort of regular royal payroll. What's going on? And we discovered fairly soon afterwards. I mean, this separation was announced at the end of 92. And in the spring of 93, I remember going on this amazing trip with her to Nepal. She was going there really to promote the work of the British Red Cross. She was its patron. But anyway, they made a great fuss of her. And she turned up with a government minister. She went with Linda Chalker, who was the development minister at the Foreign Office. And it was an incredibly successful trip because Linda Chalker, now Baroness Chalker, was able to do sort of serious sort of diplomatic stuff, minister to minister. And Diana was just drawing these vast crowds of media from all over the world. And it was utter chaos, actually. I do remember there were only 23 telephone lines out of Nepal at the time. And I was in a party of 70 journalists. So we were all fighting just to get our copy back. There was even a team there from Vogue. You didn't normally see Vogue on royal trips, but they'd turned up. And they all had special Vogue baseball caps, so the princess would see them and wave at them, they hoped. But she did do amazing things. And, we went far and wide to these very remote places, and she was promoting the Red Cross's work with children, and particularly with victims of domestic violence. I mean, it was sort of roll your sleeves up stuff. But in the middle of it, there was also sort of posh state banquet kind of things. And it was only later on, actually, I discovered also that Diana went on a very naughty late-night escape where she dodged her minders and jumped in a sports car with the Crown Prince of Nepal because he wanted to show around Kathmandu, shut down all the roads. And they whizzed around. He was doing sort of handbrake turns through the capital, having sealed off all the other traffic. And this only came to light some years later when Linda Chalker very kindly told me about this, because she'd been woken up in the middle of the night by a policeman going, "Where's the princess?" To which she went, "I don't know." And why I say it was risky was it was only a few years later, actually, that that Crown Prince of Nepal, of course, wiped out his entire family. And Nepal is no longer a kingdom. Yeah, he shot them and then shot himself. Sorry, that's a sort of slight diversion, but I mean that was the sort of the nature of Diana then. She was a bit of a free spirit. She could do that sort of thing. I mean, there's no way she could go joyriding in the middle of the night if she was still a fully fledged princess. She could do that sort of thing.
And she has these incredibly successful visits to Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it was on that one too. Yeah, Robert Mugabe, who got very excited when she turned up.
She was very dubious about him, so she had a very good instinct. She was very dubious about him. And she actually asked Douglas Hurd, who's the foreign secretary at the time, she actually asked him, "Can I continue my foreign visits?" And he says, "Yes, of course." And I think that's very much shows that she sees herself as increasingly out of the orbit of the royal family and more connected with the government. We didn't really get a chance in the last podcast to talk about Diana's charitable work, so I think we need to scroll a little way back. So she starts off as a princess. She has causes. She has many, many causes. And increasingly, Diana, as she says, AIDS, hospices, I could do this full time. And she talks about the power of touch. She talks about how she wants to be there for people. She says, I'll go where I'm needed. We see her at hospices. We see her comforting the sick. Royal Marsden, Great Ormond Street become two of her favourite charities. And there's a very interesting account, actually, that I was reading, in which some of the courtiers were saying, we don't like it when at the last minute Diana comes and says, I want to do a walkabout, or I want to visit a kindergarten. And these moments that the courtiers said made them feel like headless chickens, well, actually, they meant so much to the people who saw Diana, the power of seeing her. She says later that...
Still quite tricky if you're a courtier and you've got to lay on a walkabout 10 minutes notice, though. I
think it was more than 10 minutes notice. I think it was more than that. But certainly, Diana is connecting with the people. And I think the most important moment is in 1987, when she's asked to open the first ever dedicated AIDS ward at Middlesex Hospital. And it's impossible to understate now, isn't it, Robert, how much AIDS was stigmatised at the time. Nurses working in the hospitals didn't tell their neighbours in case people might shun them. I remember reading a problem in which a woman said she'd worked with a gay man and he brought a cake in and no one wanted to eat his cake in case they caught AIDS. I mean, it's devastating. And Diana goes to the Middlesex Hospital and she shakes hands with the patients without gloves. And she shakes hands with 12 patients and only one of them is willing to be photographed, his back to the cameras. And this moment where Diana, dressed in blue, the princess, shakes hands without gloves with a man who has HIV/AIDS. I mean, that is so significant. She later says, you can hold their hands, you can give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. It does so much to overturn the idea you can catch AIDS from toilet seats or hugging people. And Diana really has this huge impact on AIDS understanding. And of course,
she does the same actually with leprosy as well. I mean, I remember being at the leprosy mission in Zimbabwe with her. And I'd never been to they used to be called leper colonies, terrible word, but I mean, they were hospitals for people with leprosy. And there she was, not just shaking hands, but picking up children, that sort of thing. And I mean, when you think that leprosy has been stigmatized since, the Old Testament of the Bible, I mean, it's one of the oldest sort of pariah diseases. Again, I think she took it upon herself to just take away this taint and just make life that bit more comfortable
for those people. It's the power of touch, as she said. And it's interesting, it's almost going back to the old royal touch of Charles II, the idea that you can touch people. Yes, of course, it's not going to cure people, but it does so much to help. And of course, AIDS being such an excluded Cinderella cause, there was no funding. There was no funding for the scientific research that would create a cure. And with Diana's pushing it onto the world stage, funding poured in, it became a much more fashionable cause. And now, of course, now people don't die of AIDS. You can live a long and really healthy life with HIV. And I think we can really credit Diana for that revolutionary moment. So that was in her marriage. Now she's after the marriage. She's doing these incredible overseas visits. But also there's two speeches that really stick out to me. And the first one is at the first ever conference about eating disorders. And Diana goes up there and she gives a speech. And when you watch the footage, she's clearly nervous before it. And she says that the feeling of low self-esteem and self-dislike, this can really make you feel like you want to disappear, like a Disprin, which was a form of disposable aspirin, wasn't it, that dissolves in water. And for that moment, for a princess to come out and say that, a princess for whom Andrew Morton's book has already laid bare the eating disorders, that is so significant. This is a Britain in which eating disorders were not seen as a disease or suffering. They're seen as self-indulgence. And Diana actually says that women who have eating disorders, it's seen as vanity. That, I think, has totally transformed and had a huge impact on us now understanding how eating disorders are an illness and they're sufferers and people need therapy. And there's another moment a little later when Diana speaks at a conference on postnatal depression. Again, very badly understood. It was dismissed as women having a bit of baby blues, get on with it. And she says that, women who live in the shadow of others, who sacrifice all for their family, they will want to disappear. And this moment in which the princess is bringing her personal experience to bear and using it to help others and showing what she's been through, but that is a strength.
Soon after her separation, she announced she was reducing the number of charities. She then reduced it even more after her divorce.
It was just 6 after the divorce, wasn't it? Including Great Ormond Street and Royal Marsden and the AIDS Trust.
But she wanted to sort of break out of this sort of royal mould. So she felt she could do stuff without necessarily having to be a patron. She became particularly interested just generally in the world of health. I mean, she did cause rather a stir. I remember in 1996 when the Queen was on a big, very important state visit to Thailand. She'd gone to celebrate the 50th anniversary Golden Jubilee of King Bhumibol of Thailand, who was then the world's longest reigning monarch. Big deal, important trip. And right in the middle of that, Diana had decided to go to a fundraiser for another cardiac unit in Australia, down in Sydney. And halfway through the state visit, most of the royal most of the royal correspondents, and I was one of them, suddenly got a call from our editors in London saying, right, that's enough of the Queen, go and do Diana in Australia. And Buckingham Palace were absolutely furious. I mean, because, when you suddenly, half the media literally sort of get up and leave in the middle of the Queen's visit because Diana's decided to go to a fundraiser down in Sydney. That did not go down well.
But can we blame Diana for that? I mean, yes.
I can blame her for the timing.
She
I
has,
think,
she has to go
like,
to fundraisers because the Queen is always so busy doing engagements. You're going to upstage her at any turn.
Yeah, but you never upstage a state visit. That's,
I mean,
all royal calendars work around.
It's interesting. It's Arthur Edwards, the photographer, says.
Arthur was there. Arthur, the royal photographer of the Sun. He was on that trip.
He says that people didn't want her eclipsing the royal family because certain visits were turned down. Bangladesh, she wanted to go, that was turned down. Increasingly, this has been the problem throughout her marriage, that everything Diana does gets on the front pages, and the royal hierarchy is that the top boss and the senior royals, they should go first, not this woman who's married into the royal family.
That is kind of how organisations work. That's how the government works. You don't upstage a prime minister if you're a junior minister.
But
it's just how hierarchies are.
That's the problem. The junior housing minister is not going to upstage John Major. It's just different when it's Diana. And this is what she says. She says, everywhere I go, 60 to 90 people follow me for photos. Let's use my platform for good.
Yeah, no, use your platform for good, but maybe not the same day that the Queen's addressing, a state banquet in Thailand would have been the view of the palace. But, off we went to Sydney, and it was fascinating because, again, we came up against this issue of, what is Diana's status? It was really interesting. I remember all the people in Sydney at this hospital gala, and there was a big sort of lunch, and all the officials have been told not to address her. By then, by the way, she'd been divorced, so she'd lost her HRH. And people were told, don't address her as Your Royal Highness because she's not royal. Well, of course, everybody completely ignored that, called her Your Royal Highness. She was, to her credit, I mean, she was embarrassed that she had upstaged the Queen. I remember going to this lunch with her in Sydney, and she sort of left the lunch about 10 minutes before she was due to give a speech. And we all wondered what's going on. And she'd gone behind the scenes to rewrite the speech, to stick in an extra line saluting the Commonwealth as a sort of sop to the Queen. And again, what was her status? She arrived at Sydney. I mean, in the old days, there would have been an official motorcade ready to pick her up. She was no longer royal, so there was this motorcade. I remember it was sponsored by the local Toyota dealership, and it had sort of branding on the side. But again, it was as ever. It was just a reminder of this eternal question. What is Diana post separation? She was still HRH. We were told she was going to be Queen. August 96, a decree absolute comes through. She loses her title of HRH.
They are couple number 31 at Somerset House on the 16th of July 1996. The divorce comes through. So the divorce is prompted by the various television interviews. First, Charles with Jonathan Dimbleby admits adultery on TV. Then
that's in 94, yeah.
Yes. And then in 95, Diana's is broadcast on the 16th of November. And on the 20th of December, the Queen writes to Diana saying, you must agree to divorce. But this is very interesting in terms of Diana's divorce, because I think the royal household had expected her just to say, okay, that's fine, I'll go. And there's no question about Diana's access to the boys. She's a devoted mother, the royal household agree. There's no question that she'll live in Kensington Palace, that's fine. But the two sticking points are the HRH title and the money. And in the end, Diana agrees to give up the HRH title, but I think the vision that she just goes off with no settlement at all, that's not going to happen. She's got her own solicitor, her own lawyer, Anthony Julius. And if she'd been married to a CEO or a businessman, she would expect a fair settlement. I think the royal household pretty much thought she'd go with not much of a settlement or a stipend. And instead, Anthony Julius and the royal lawyers, they have to work together. Diana doesn't agree immediately, and she does get this settlement of £17 million.
Well, there's a very interesting parallel operation which shows what might have happened, because at exactly the same time that Diana and Charles are getting divorced, so are Andrew and Fergie. And Fergie goes down the conventional route. She's got a very old-fashioned firm of family lawyers, and it's fascinating that at the end of it, Diana, having gone to Anthony Julius at Mishcon de Rea, who are absolute sort of, better watch it because we're talking about lawyers here, but I think it's fair to say they're more in the Rottweiler mode of lawyer. And Fergie went to a much more tweedy, yeah, exactly.
One of the best firms in London.
And so what happens? Diana walks away with a deal worth, I think it's around 17 million. And Fergie walks away with a divorce deal commensurate with the wife of a Royal Navy officer. I think it's a sort of 5-figure sum.
And I think Diana was warned by Fergie's settlement, wasn't she? Because Fergie gets given, I think, a house of 600,000 in the names of the daughters, and some money for the daughters. She's also got these huge debts, which of course Diana does not have. But I think very significantly, Anthony Julius said to the royal lawyers, we're not just going to look at Charles's income from the Duchy of Cornwall, we can look at the wider royal wealth as well here. And 17 million, it was all on the front pages of the newspapers. Diana gets 17 million, it's too much. But it really reminds us that this is modern divorce law. If you've if you bring up the children, you support your husband, you deserve a fair settlement. So Diana's divorce is very significant. And it's interesting, isn't it, Robert? Because they divorce on the 16th of July. And on the 1st of July, on her birthday, Charles just pops in to Kensington Palace and they have a very pleasant conversation. And you start to think that maybe there could have been a post-divorce friendship, an amicable relationship, because the two of them are so devoted to the children. I mean, Diana is a famously devoted mother. She is so devoted to her children, and her life.
So is Prince Charles.
I mean, Charles was told off, I think, by Edward the Dean for wanting to spend too much time with his children. And Diana, she has really tried to bring up the children in this, give them a normal life. They go to theme parks, to fast food restaurants, to cinemas. She takes them to charities, to Centrepoint. She really tries to instill in them the understanding of the suffering of others. And really, Diana's vision for the children it's mold breaking and revolutionary. She does the school run when they're little. She's tied up in their occupation. I think the chief executive of Refuge, I think it is, says Diana's life was her children. She lived and breathed for them. And the idea that you put the children first as a mother is groundbreaking for a royal.
Well, I mean, way back at the start of their marriage, of course, she insisted that they took William with them on their tour of Australia in 1983. And Prince Charles was very happy about that too. So, I mean, it was interesting that when everything was being thrashed out, as you say, one thing that was not an issue was equal access.
That was never in question. It was the HRH and the money, which was the sticking points, which Julius was fighting hard on. We have the famous moment on the 13th of January 1997 when she lands in Angola, the most heavily mined country in the world at the time. I believe the population was 12 million. There were 15 million landmines, and every 334th person was maimed by a landmine. And Diana goes to visit one of these little girls who's been out going to get water, a 7-year-old girl called Elena, and steps on a landmine. And this poor child, her intestines are blown out and she's dying. And Diana goes to speak to her and holds her hand and nurses her and speaks to her. And after Diana's gone, Christina Lamb, I think, who's accompanying her, who can speak Portuguese, tries to explain to the little girl who's saying, who is that lady? Tries to explain who she is. She's a princess. And the little girl says, is she an angel? And this moment by which Diana is talking about landmines, it's actually seen as quite shocking, because there's a MP on the Commons Defence Select Committee who says, this is a very important and sophisticated argument. It does not help for a very ill-informed princess to be out there pointing at landmine victims and saying how terrible it is. And isn't that the most misogynist thing you can imagine anyone saying?
There was a Tory minister got slapped down, actually. He described her as a loose cannon at the time for getting involved. But she knew what she was doing, because she'd actually teamed up with an old colleague of mine, great man, Bill Deeds, Lord Deeds, who's passionate about landmines. And he was with me at the Telegraph, and she got Bill in to sort of help her write her speeches on landmines. And Bill was with her on these trips, travelling around in her Land Rover. So she was well up to speed on the issues.
And she was very political. She was very clever, because when she was asked, this is political, you're allying with the opposition to John Major's government, which of course was the Blair government coming along. She said, I'm not political, I'm a humanitarian. And that, I think, was very significant. And then
it was a global issue. I mean, the campaign against landmines was gathering traction, right around the world. So it did put her at odds with the major government, because the policy at the time, And you do have to
The
occasionally you have to have a
importance of
better
sophisticated
yeah,
argument.
well, it's there is a military argument, which is if you're fighting an enemy and they've got landmines, then you need landmines. That's it's just sort of brutal fact of war. That doesn't stop you trying to get rid of the things.
Well, they should, yes. And this is the thing, the clearance hadn't started in Angola.
Yeah,
There was
it
many
hadn't.
countries across the world. And Major's government did change tack, but they had lost votes by then. And of course, one of the saddest things of all is that after Diana died, one of the campaigns to ban landmines and the American campaigner Jody Mills won the Nobel Peace Prize in October 1997. And had Diana been alive, she would have been a key part of those celebrations.
Well-
and she has that moment, I think, we've been talking about her photo moment, haven't we? But the most iconic photograph moment for me of Diana is when she walks through that heavily mined area in Quito, wearing the visor, wearing the Red Cross, the jacket.
Perigo Minas, I remember she has on her bulletproof vest.
She's in Angola, she's walking through and she walks through this mined area, and the Red Cross hadn't necessarily wanted her to go to Quito because it was very dangerous. And then when she's done the walk, some of the photographers say they haven't got the shot. So she does it again. I mean, that is so brave. And these pictures beamed around the world, they are transformative in terms of understanding war and saying, look at these innocents, these children, these people who are totally uninvolved, they're dying and they're being maimed, and we need to do something about it.
Well, of course, that was at the start of '97. That summer, of course, by now she has started some sort of a relationship with Dodi Fayed, son of Harrod's
It's a very
owner,
short
Mohammed
relationship,
Fayed.
isn't it? 30 days when, many people think that perhaps she was still in love with the heart surgeon, Hasnat Khan, but Diana...
Who we haven't mentioned, Hasnat Khan was a heart surgeon based in London with whom she was
met at the
very
Royal
close.
Brompton, didn't she?
Yeah, and she's a single woman by now. She's been separated since '92. She's been divorced now since '96. So she's finding her way. She's sort of finding a new life, and the ever scheming Mohammed Fayed is determined to try and set her up with his son Dodi. In the summer of '97, she goes with the boys to have a sort of. She
goes on his
invites her down
yacht.
to Saint-Tropez to go on his yacht and his villa,
And I think it's
and
interesting.
that's where she's introduced to Dodi, and that's where things sort of start.
I think it's interesting because Diana was lonely. It's really interesting because she's the most famous woman in the world, but still she's lonely, and people don't invite her out to places because they think there's going to be paparazzi there. And when it comes to the summer, I mean, I stay in London over the summer, but the society goes. They all go off to the country, and they'd all gone to Switzerland or the south of France. And Diana was alone. She asked Teddy Forstmann, this American billionaire who she was very friendly with, could you find me a house for me and the boys in the Hamptons? And he found her a house in the Hamptons, place where all the American super rich go. And she said to him, no, the security services have said, I can't take William and Harry there. So they couldn't go there. And I think the security services did allow her to take William and Harry to Mohammed Al-Fayed's yacht, because that was seen as a yacht and it was seen as secure. But of course, at this point, Al-Fayed is giving NDAs to employees in Harrods because of sexual harassment.
Yeah. Well, we didn't know that at the time, but I mean,
She did not know that,
no,
but
she certainly
the
didn't know
security
that.
services might have known
But
that.
what we also have to remember is that under the terms of the divorce, she gets the boys for part of the holidays, and Prince Charles gets them for the rest. So what it roughly broke down that she would have them at the end of July when they left school for the first couple of weeks of the holidays, and in September before they went back to school, and he would have them for most of August.
And they go to Balmoral in the traditional royal
and
family
for
thing.
her, that summer of '97, that was her first sort of full summer, if you like, after the divorce. And it was incredibly painful. The idea of spending pretty much the whole of August without the boys that she adored, was very difficult. And so that's why, as you say, she was ringing around friends. And one of the people she rang were her old friends at the Red Cross to say, look, I'm at a loose end. I really want to do something. I want to take my mind off the fact I haven't got the boys. I want to go somewhere and be useful. And that's why actually her last landmine trip was arranged in August '97. She went to Bosnia. Saw more mine clearance, met more victims of these ghastly things. Then when she came back from that, she still had this sort of time on her hands, and that's when she went and joined Dodi Fayed down in the south of France, and they were on Mohammed Fayed's yacht. And, that's when she was on her way back from that trip, heading home, see the boys. She couldn't wait, and that's when they stopped over in Paris on that fateful night, went to dinner at the Ritz, we know what happened next.
So they try and get out the back. And fatefully,
Mohammed Fayed, I think, is quite enjoying all the publicity.
But Diana is not.
No, she's certainly not.
And Diana and Al-Fayed, of course, makes the fateful decision to demand that his head of security comes in from his day off on
Fayed,
Nepal.
by the way, is in charge of this entire thing. He has said to them, you will go to dinner in my hotel, you will get in my car to get back to my flat.
She was heartbroken. Everyone was staring at her.
If anyone really had questions to answer after that appalling tragedy, I'm afraid it's Mohammed Fayed. But let's not get into that. That's for another podcast. But as you say, they were leaving the Brits.
Paul had taken prescription drugs and some alcohol. They go out the back, and he's not. I would say he's not an expert driver. He's not an expert driver, and they head into the tunnel.
He's not a sober driver.
He's not sober. He's taken prescription drugs and some alcohol. He doesn't seem drunk, but it's drunk, and he's trying to escape the paparazzi. At 12:24 a.m., he smashes into the pillar in the Pont d'Alma tunnel, and almost immediately, the paparazzi are on them. So Dodi Al-Fayed and Henri Paul, the driver, are killed immediately. Diana and her bodyguard are still alive. And one of the paparazzis, because of course it's a crime in France not to help if someone is in a roadside accident. So one of the paparazzi actually does open the door, and he does it to check her pulse because he's hoping she's still alive. And she is still alive. But of course, once he's done that, and I think actually I do believe this guy, Romain Durat, that he's honourable, that they all crowd in and start taking photos. So poor Diana is there in this car, and Dodi's dead, and they're all snapping pictures at her. A passing doctor comes, who's coming home from a birthday party. He thinks she probably can survive. And finally, the firemen get there, and the firemen get her out. The policeman's trying to stop the paps from taking photos. They won't stop. They finally get her out. The firemen get her out and put her in a brace and get her into an ambulance. But her body really just starts to sort of collapse after she gets out of the car. She gets to the hospital at 2 a.m. and they do what they can for her. But by 4 a.m., Diana is pronounced dead.
And there ends this extraordinary life. I mean, there begins an entirely separate saga of that terrible week of having to break the news to the boys, of how the royal family react, how Britain reacts, how the world reacts, the huge outpouring of grief, that extraordinary procession through London ahead of her funeral with her two boys marching behind her coffin along with Earl Spencer, Prince Charles and the Duke of Edinburgh. That extraordinary service at Westminster Abbey. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be there. I remember it so well. You saw all those strands that we've been talking about of her life, people from all those charities, world leaders. I mean, it was the nearest thing to a state funeral that wasn't a state funeral. I mean, there was a whole debate about what sort of funeral should she have. This had never happened before. What sort of funeral do you give someone who was royal, is no longer royal?
And the feeling of the royal household, wasn't it, was that it should be private, but Charles...
No, it wasn't there. No, it was not. It was some of the Spencer family was saying it should be private. And the royal household, to their credit, and I've interviewed all the people who were involved in this at length on it, and the people in the Labour government as well. And a lot of myths have arisen that week.
Because the Blair aides said that they had to persuade the royals to have it as a ceremonial funeral. Of course, they had to borrow the Queen
Blair
Mother's
aides weren't
idea.
even on the case. Lord Airlie and his team had already drawn up the plan for the funeral at Westminster Abbey. I've seen the memo on the Sunday. The Blairites didn't get into the first meeting till the Monday. It was very clear within those first hours. The family, very understandably, the Spencer family thought, she's not royal anymore. Let's have a nice private service. And it was actually it was helped by the fact that Diana's brother-in-law, Robert Fellows, was the Queen's private secretary. They very soon realised, this is going to be huge. This has got to be a proper funeral. And that Sunday, Lord Airlie, who was the Lord Chamberlain, a wise man, very wise man, he summoned the comptroller, the guy in charge of ceremonial, and said, start again. We're not dusting off any blueprints. We're not, his phrase was, this has to be de novo from the start. We need a clean. This has got to be a uniquely Diana event.
And that's very interesting because a lot of the accounts say that it was really the royal household who were resisting. They wanted a private funeral. It was Charles who was saying, I must go and collect her. She must lay in state. We must have a ceremonial funeral. But your research suggests that actually the royal household were accepting of this funeral that it was going to be a
Absolutely.
huge funeral from Diana right from the beginning.
Yeah. They knew that they could see which way this was going, and it was.
And there was all this public anger. There was this soaring public anger about the royal family.
That came a little later.
There was "Show us you care, Mum" on the front of the Express.
Where's your flag?
There was the arguments that there were not enough condolence books at the palace. That there was not a flag flying.
That all came about 3 or 4 days later.
And this is really soaring. And I remember London at the time, and people were weeping. And I think we actually ran out of flowers. There were not enough flowers, so the avalanche.
60 million flowers were done.
They had to get them in from other countries, and the avalanche.
15 tons they
15 tons of flowers. The avalanche of grief and devastation and outpouring of sadness, and really just symbolised how much Diana was not just the tragic death of a young mother, but also a mould breaker. That this woman was so impactful on so many lives, people who never met her, never knew her, and what she'd done created this massive impact, and the funeral was such a tribute to that.
Well, it was, and I think everyone has their own memories of that week. I certainly do. And I think we tend to conflate everything sort of coming together, and there was the sort of the tears and the anger and the royals stuck up at Balmoral. But what was extraordinary is by the time we got to that day of the funeral, the Queen had come back down to London, had made that address
as
to
a grandmother,
the nation,
speaking and saying how she respected and admired Diana's gifts. I would say that was the recognition Diana had always wanted from the Queen. She gets it after she dies.
And there's that moment when the Queen stops the car outside the palace and gets out. And that's a very brave moment, I think, because that could have, if that only needed a few hecklers, that could have gone very, very nastily wrong. But completely silent, and then slowly the Queen goes inside the palace, and you start to hear this extraordinary sound, which is applause. And there's this sense that, okay, the monarch's returned. We're now going to, the anger sort of subsides. We are going to make this the great send-off for Diana. And so many people have turned up in London that they've actually had to extend the funeral route. I mean, the police are having a real nightmare because they worked out that the distance from where she's lying at rest in the Queen's Chapel by St James's Palace, from there to Westminster Abbey, it's not long enough. There are just so many people want to turn up. So what they actually do is take her back for the night before the funeral to Kensington Palace, which is a good mile and a bit further to the west. So effectively, really just to extend the route so that there is more space for people to pay their tributes. And the world tunes in, and it's extraordinary. And then we all remember Lord Spencer's address. You've got Elton John playing "Goodbye England's Rose,"
Candle in the Wind,
and then at the end, the coffin begins this journey back to her. The Spencer family seat in Northamptonshire. And we just see those extraordinary scenes all the way along the M1 as sort of people just sort of come climbing over
the M1
over
is
the banks.
deserted.
Yeah, well, it has to be. I mean, you can't.
Of course, but no. But that to me was seeing this very busy motorway deserted, and that is Diana's funeral procession, and this incredible outpouring of feeling and distress and grief across the world just reflected her revolutionary impact. It's a terrible what if, but if Diana had lived, what she would have done, lived into her 50s and 60s, what she would have done. She was taken away too soon.
For it. She was a force for good. She wasn't perfect. She'd be the first to say that. She could have her moments.
No one is perfect.
Exactly. But, I think we look back now and it's no surprise, I think, that at the time, it was this huge global loss. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that Time magazine, I remember, not Time, Newsweek. Newsweek did a special Diana tribute edition after her death, and it was the best-selling issue of Newsweek ever, including after Pearl Harbor, VE Day, VJ Day, JFK, you name it. That Diana edition sold out, and they reprinted, and that sold out. So it wasn't just, people in Britain, of a certain age or in a certain position who felt in some way vulnerable or whatever. I think around the world there was a real feeling that the fairy tale narrative still existed to an extent, and it had just come to this terribly unhappy ending.
Very unhappy ending. I mean, she made people's lives better. Her smile was really like a laser. And she'd be 64 now. And I think if we'd imagined she'd had all these more years to create an impact on the humanitarian community, global ambassador, working for the good of others, what more good could she have done?
That period, the second half of the 20th century, it could truly be said that really the three dominant figures in British public life were women, and they were the Queen, Margaret Thatcher, and Diana.
And they were indeed the Diana years.
We could go on talking about this, as I'm sure all of us could. Everyone has things to say about Diana. We all have our favourite memories of her. So for me, Robert Hardman.
And for me, Kate Williams.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.